Hey, grade sixes. So we're gonna try to do something slightly different. I'm always trying to find something for the best of both worlds. Obviously, I can't uh, film myself, or I haven't figured out how to film myself and have slides, manipulatives, do everything at once. Hopefully this works. We'll see if it does. I'll keep experimenting. All right. So today what we're going to do is we're going to keep talking about ancient Athens. We're almost done the unit. We've introduced their democracy a little bit. We talked about the roles, right? We talked about the slaves, the medics, and the citizens, and we looked at the difference between women and men, right? And all of that. And we just finished talking about the government structure, right? How is the government actually structured? You also looked at comparing it to modern day democracy, and we're going to extend that a little bit more. And really, like at the end of this, we should answer, is it a good example of democracy, right? Was ancient Athens, even though it was the foundation, right, almost like the father of democracy, based on what we know about democratic countries, was it a good democracy? So the first slide, right? So is the first stage of the final state, right? So this is definitely the first stage of democracy that we know of. But is it the finished product? Is it a good product, or have we improved it? Have we changed it? So what we have to do first is we kind of have to look at what is a democracy on this slide, right? Three things really. Democracy is power to the people, right? So it's of the people, by the people, for the people. So it means that the government is made of citizens, right? Who are chosen by the citizens, and they make rules that benefit for the citizens. Okay? So this government is citizens, elected or chosen by the people, the citizens, and they make laws for the benefit of the people who voted them in. That's what a democracy should be. As we talked about before, with the principles of democracy, there's four pillars in a democratic society, right? There's freedom, representation, equity, and justice. Right? That's what you need to have to be a democracy. Sorry, right? These are the pillars. These are the foundational principles. Freedom is the right to act, speak, or think as you would want to. Representation means speaking, acting, and making decisions on the behalf of others. Equity is the value of kind of being fair and giving people what they need. And justice is the system used to enforce society's laws. So there should be some form of these pillars to classify it as a democracy. Now, we kind of covered this quickly before the break, but these are kind of six characteristics that a government, like a democracy, will have. Right? So first one is going to be citizen rule. Right? So they have the right to vote, representatives, there's regular elections, there's opportunity to choose someone to represent them. There is a majority that rules, but minorities still have rights. Right? So the majority kind of decides what's going to happen, but the individuals, the people who don't really have a say as much, they also have rights protected. Every individual has rights. There is equal treatment under the law. Everyone has the same rights no matter how rich they are or what class they are. Free and fair election, right? And so that means basically everyone is entitled to the election process, right? They're held regularly. People don't have power for too long. Citizen participation is huge in a democracy, right? Without citizen participation, it's not actually a democracy. Of the people, by the people, for the people. Right? And the last one is cooperation and compromise. So that to be fair and just, they have to protect the right to be different and to disagree. Now, to summarize ancient Athens kind of quickly, okay? So this is the structure of the society. This is almost like the roles of it, okay? So there was the citizens, and they had the most privilege. They could only be Athenian born to be a citizen, right? Both parents had to be from Athens. Okay? Medics were people who were living there, but they came from, they're often referred to as foreigners. Okay? So they did not have citizenship. They did not have the privileges of citizenship. Sometimes, though, the medics could be a lot richer than the citizens, right? So the medics could be really wealthy, but they didn't have citizenship. We talked about women, we talked about boys, and we talked about kind of how their roles were different. And the last one is we talked about slaves, right? They were owned by others. They had no choice about the situation, often through war. They were the lowest of this society. Next slide, right? There's rights and responsibilities. Citizens were expected to participate in the government. It's kind of a right and responsibility. They could be punished if they weren't, right? Medics, they had no rights. They couldn't vote. They couldn't serve in government positions. They could fight in the army. They did have to pay taxes, but they didn't kind of get the benefits. Women had no rights, they had no responsibilities in the government, and the same as slaves. Decision-making process. So this is what we just talked about. We talked about the boule, we talked about the assembly, and basically that's where the male citizens, right, would go in the assembly, and they would vote on what the boule kind of draft up, right? So the Council of 500, they would say, this is what you should talk about, and the assembly is like, okay, we'll talk about it, but this is the way we're voting, and they kind of have that final say. Okay, debate and discussion, but who can participate? Only the citizens, only the male citizens. All right, no, non-citizens such as medics and women, they could influence, right? So what that means is, like, think about in the classroom how hypothetically I get to make the decisions. All right, I get to have the final say. You guys, though, can influence me. Maybe you say, Mr. Callum, this isn't working, right? Let's say I want to have a test on Wednesday, and a couple of you chime in saying, Wednesday's really busy, we have this, this, and this, and this. That's not going to happen. It's not your decision to make. I ultimately make the decision, but you can kind of influence that. All right? So that's kind of like the role of the medics and women in the decision-making process. The boule, the Council of 500, and the assembly, they come together, they negotiate it, but they can be influenced by non-citizens. But only citizens can be part of that table. And the last one is just, how do they influence societies? Well, citizens, like we said, debate and vote. Others just try to persuade. Right? So although that was the structure of ancient Athens, that was the structure of democracy. You can slow this video down, you can look through the slides, you can pause it, take your time really kind of exploring these concepts. But democracy, we have the 4 pillars, we know what kind of makes up a democratic society, and we are looking at Athens. Right? So when they come together, is Athens a good example of democracy? And what we're going to see is 4 perspectives. So remember, perspective is how you see the world, how you see an issue. Okay, so we're going to look at 4 right now, and you're going to I want you to think about, which one do you agree with? If you had to select one, which one would you pick? So the first perspective, viewpoint number 1, I don't understand why ancient Athens is called a democracy when only certain men could be citizens. If I lived back then, none of the women in my family would have been allowed to vote. So this perspective is saying ancient Athens is not a democracy because none of the women in their family could have voted. Only a certain amount of citizens could actually vote. Right? So that's why they think it's maybe not a democracy. Do you agree? Do you disagree? All right, think about that. Viewpoint number 2. Democracy in ancient Athens was different from what we have in Canada today, or any democratic society. It doesn't have to be Canada. We include many more people in our definition of a citizen. Still, Athenian citizens had many rights for that time in history. They voted directly on laws, and every citizen had the opportunity to be on a jury or in the assembly. They were also free to give their opinion on issues. In many other countries, Mr. Callum, you gotta spell that right, countries. There you go, guys. Sorry about that, fans. Right? In other countries, people were punished for speaking out. That's also important. This one's viewpoint 2. We're kind of going back and say, think about this on a historic perspective. Right? This was happening such a long time ago when other areas were tyrannies and monarchs and kings and queens, right? All that stuff. But here, people had a voice. So while it may not be the democracy you have now, it's still a good democracy comparatively. Right? Interesting point. Maybe you disagree, maybe you agree with that. Trying to change slides here, guys. Sorry. A little awkward, technical difficulty. There, viewpoint 3. All right? In some ways, the system in Athens was more democratic than in other democratic societies today, or countries today. Almost once a week, they gathered to vote on laws. Sometimes there were thousands of people voting on a single issue. Many citizens in Canada don't even bother to vote in elections. It's their civic responsibility. I don't get it. Viewpoint 3, right? They're saying, actually, when you really think about what is democracy, people voting and participating, ancient Athens is more democratic than what we have, right? So that pillar of like representation, it's more democratic because people are voting every single week, or citizens are voting every single week in ancient Athens, whereas here we have an election once every 4 years, and the voting turnout is sometimes under 60%. So which one is more democratic? Something to think about. And the last perspective, Canada is a democracy. However, for many years, only men who owned property were allowed to vote. Women, First Nations people, and many immigrants could not vote. Laws on voting changed because our attitudes changed. This shows that democracy can change over time. I think ancient Athens gave us a good start for democracy. So what they're showing us is that it is a good start to democracy. no society is perfect when they first embrace the principles of democracy. Even Canada, right, or the United States, people, and we looked at this, people couldn't vote for such a long time, right? So even though we might sit here now and be like, yeah, everyone can vote, everyone's a citizen, right? Well, that's now, but they had to start from somewhere. So these are our four perspectives, our four viewpoints, right? Each one very different, right? It's important though that you start to think about, what do you identify with? Which one do you identify with? What is your perspective on Athenian democracy? Is it a good example of democracy? You have three questions. It's going to be attached as an assignment. The three questions are basically, which one of these four do you support, right? And why? Which one of these stand out to you about the perspectives on democracy, and why does it stand out to you? Why is, like, so maybe for me it's number two, right? And I think number two is the correct answer because I have to read number two really quickly. Sorry, I should have picked a shorter one. Different. Oh, because I think that citizens in Athens had many rights, right? And I think about that idea, like they did have rights. It's important there. So I focus on that idea of many rights, and that's why I support on it. Number two, I believe, is if you can change anything about ancient Athenian democracy. So think about all the stuff we've talked about. Go back to these slides, right here, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. If you can change one thing, what would it be? Right? If you could change one thing, what would it be? Right? There is one more question, but I'll let you read that one yourself to mull it over. That one's a little more summative. Answer those three, submit it. That's all you got for today. All right? If you have any questions, email me. If you want to Zoom about this, let's set up a meeting. All right? See you guys.